because it consciously acknowledges the role of cultural expression in modes of resistance and political campaigning all over the world and historically. But there are two concepts that are quite critical, and that is resistance and imagination as key organizing principles. Because resistance is about naming what is wrong in the world and resisting oppression and repression, but imagination is quite crucial for hope and activism to imagine a different way of doing things. And so this kind of relay between resistance and imagination is also what I'm going to be talking about a little bit about today. So another one of my favorite thinkers, also from America, is Robin D.G. Kelley. And he says, the question remains, what are today's young activists dreaming about? We know what they are fighting against, but what are they fighting for? And I think if we think about a lot of the ugliness of the world and the protests that go on around the world, we know a lot of what people are fighting against, but what are they dreaming for? What are they dreaming about? And again, this links to hope. If you don't have hope, you don't have activism, and it's creativity and play and imagination that is kind of the groundwork for a lot of hope. And so I thought, just as a way of us getting to know each other a little bit better and not me just speaking the whole time. So Freedom Dreaming is actually the title of Robin D.G. Kelley's very famous book that has just come out in a new edition. And in that book, he talks about Black intellectual thought historically about dreaming of another future. But I wondered if each of you could think in your heads about two things. What does freedom mean to you? If you had to answer the question spontaneously, freedom means, and if you could change one thing in your town, your city, your neighborhood, what would it be? Imagine you had the power all of a sudden, change something. What would it be that you would change? And I'm going to ask you each to just think about that a little bit. What does freedom mean to you? And if you could change one thing in your local environment, what would it be? I'm going to stop sharing so I can. And I'm going to ask somebody to start and maybe just unmute themselves and, well, let me start. If I was in a room full of people, we'd be going around the room and finding this out from everyone else, but we can't do that here. So I'll start. So freedom means, as a woman, walking wherever I want at any time of the day or night. And then if there was one thing I could change about my city, it would be that everybody had decent, adequate, and dignified housing. So can I ask somebody else, or should I nominate someone else?
Any volunteers?
Any volunteers? You're not all going to go, but let's just hear. Clavius is unmuted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. For me, freedom means like being able to have like free will, I guess, like being able to like make a decision, like despite consequences, you know. And something I'd change about the city would probably be this is a bit insignificant, but like, you know, for pedestrians, like I walk to school and it's from where I am, it's kind of hard because it's just like sidewalk that like it's really difficult to cross basically. Like I would make it easier for pedestrians to be able to like get to their places.
Good. And what city are you in?
Yeah, please just say where you are.
Oh, I'm in Greensboro.
Okay.
Great.
Fabulous. By the way, there's no right or wrong answer to this. So, yeah, Quinn.
So I would say that freedom means, I guess, self-expression. You know, I very much believe that like somebody who is free is able to be their authentic self around other people and basically just live and let live and do whatever you want without hurting other people. Because then of course that's where your rights end and someone else's rights start. And I'm also in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I would change, if I could change one thing, I would definitely make the city generally safer at night. Because like there are some parts of the city that there's just a bunch of like disparities, and of course there's a lot of different things you can change. Greensboro is one of the worst food deserts in the country. So that's definitely something that I could change, but also yeah, just making the entire city much safer, so that like I can go down to the local convenience store at night if I realize I'm out of whatever supplies I need, and I can just do that without having to worry about something happening.
Great, thank you, Quinn. Somebody else? Can we have another couple of people just to share how they would? Yes, thanks, Nikolai.
So to me, freedom would mean having equal access and opportunities. And for my city, I live in Fayetteville, I'd like to see more greenery. We generally have mostly just buildings and urban buildings and stuff like that, just roads with flat grass along the sides. I'd like to see more native plants and animals introduced back after destroyed the whole landscape.
Yes, wonderful. Somebody else.
Pooja, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to, because I'd like
But
to
you
get
just
someone
have.
from, yes, I'd like to get someone from outside the US to talk as well. So would you mind?
Yes, for sure. So for me, freedom means like just to be authentic, and just having the ability to like just being yourself. For me, I think, because for me, I find it a bit difficult to be myself, because like I'm an open schooler, and in India it's like abnormal to be an open schooler, and because of that people start judging you, that because you can't cope up with the regular schooling, that's why you don't go to a school, which is not true. And I want that freedom, that it's okay if I make decisions, it's my life, I can do whatever I want. So I want that sense of freedom, and just not regretting the things that I'm doing for my betterment.
And what would you change?
There are a lot of things to change in India, but mostly I think people's mentality, like change it into a improve mindset. Yeah.
All right. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Feel free to put stuff in the chat if you want to as well, so we can also kind of get some ideas about where people are at.
If I could ask one more person, because we've crossed national borders, but we haven't crossed generational borders. So Mark Paulson, you're an older person like myself. Would you like to share?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Well, I was thinking about freedom. I thought about freedom as the ability to express yourself in whatever ways, artistically, politically, in ways that you're comfortable with. And, I want that freedom. And I feel that is something that we are losing a lot of because of people intimidating you or judging you or stuff like that. So I'd like that. That's what I think of freedom. And changing one thing. Well, I live in New York City, so I wish there were less high-rise buildings and more parks. That's what I would like. And thank you, Dan.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you to the other Quinn who put in the chat, also about the local environment being cleaner, safer, more accessible food pantries and shelter areas, and freedom means to be completely in control of your own life and body. Okay, wonderful. So there's some synergies as well, and there's some quite particular things in terms of where people are living and their sense of environment. Okay, we're going to touch on that a little bit later. I'm just going to share my screen a little bit. Thank you, everyone, very much. Yeah. So there. Okay. So another way of kind of thinking about change politically as well is this notion of prefigurative politics. And there's ideas of prefigurative politics. And basically what prefigurative politics means is that you embody and practice the world you dare to dream. So on the right-hand side, I've got a picture of a tented library with free library books that was part of Occupy Wall Street. And many of the Occupy movements around the world, whether they're occupying a square or occupying outside Wall Street or occupying a building, practice prefigurative politics in that they reorganize the ways of leadership and the ways of going about relating to each other in the world that shadows the kind of world that you'd like to see. And so there's many, many examples of this that can also be sites of activism. On the other side is a picture of me taken 25 years ago. And I was thinking about this as another example of a prefigurative politics. I was working as a volunteer for this incredible cultural activist in Vienna, Austria, who worked with people with quite severe disabilities, cognitive as well as physical disabilities. And she just, for the time, was really radical in making disabilities visible and making sure that people understood that people with disabilities were autistic too. And what she did was, so in Vienna, you know, it's quite a high art society. She would do things like make sure that there was a Viennese ball, but for people with all sorts of abilities and disabilities, and working with people for abilities and disabilities with each other. And then what she was doing 25 years ago was, before disability arts was also a huge thing, was practicing a prefigurative politics in making sure the people that she worked with were visible, that they were seen as artistic. And I'm mentioning it because it had such a profound effect on me, and in terms of how I also live my life now in terms of disability and visibility. So there's lots of big and small ways that the future that you want to see can be practiced and lived in small and big ways in the current present. And of course, the Eastside Institute knows this because they do that all the time. So I'm sure Dan has many, many examples of that as well. Okay, so the next part of what I'm going to be talking about is really moving towards Africa, because I want to talk about how the arts in particular were harnessed as part of liberation struggles, and what does that mean in a kind of emancipatory way, so that when we think about arts and emancipation and arts and activism, we also think about what happens in terms of liberation movements. And I just want to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's an important kind of way to theorize, but then to understand what happens post-liberation. So, I mean, I think many of you know that colonialism as well as post-colonialist thinkers recognize that colonialism is tied to identity and representation. And so a wonderful writer like Chuna Achebe, you know, says, what does Africa mean to the world? When you see an African, what does it mean to a white man? And here he's talking about the colonial gaze, the way of looking at the world. But that he also, in this other quote, says, art is a man's constant effort to create for himself a different order of reality from that which is given to him. And so this notion of cultural resistance comes here in Achebe's quote about art as well. Sorry, I know this is dense. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long. But so post-colonial writers long recognized the link between colonial oppression and cultural oppression. That you need a cultural system to legitimize oppression. You need a cultural system to legitimize supremacy and hierarchy. And then the flip side of that is a cultural resistance that reclaims a self-representation on people's own terms. And so some of this theory also comes from Kenyan intellectual and writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o in his very famous book, Decolonizing the Mind, where he talks about the effect of cultural oppression He says the biggest weapon yielded and daily unleashed by imperialism against collective defiance is the cultural bomb. The effects of a cultural bomb is to annihilate a people's belief in their names, in their languages, in their environment, in their heritage of struggle, in their unity, and ultimately in themselves. It makes them see the past as one wasteland of non-achievement, and it makes them want to distance themselves from that wasteland. It's such a powerful quote because it captures so much of what colonialism did in terms of denigrating people's names, languages, cultures, artistic means of expression, ways of practicing all sorts of things, be it health, be it justice, etc., etc. But we can see it in other imperialistic ways around the world as well, in terms of what culture is valued and what culture is denigrated, what languages are given value and which aren't. Please just stop me if any of this is, I'm going too fast. So part of many African liberation leaders is to marry the idea of arts with liberation. So someone like Amilcar Cabral says thus, it may be seen that if the imperialist domination has the vital need to practice cultural oppression, national liberation is necessarily an act of culture. And so this idea of resisting oppression and colonialization is also a cultural act, which is quite important when we think of the link between activism and arts and creativity as well. So in South Africa, along with the liberation struggles, in the US at the same time, Black consciousness was emerging as a kind of South African mirror to some of what was happening in the US. And Steve Biko is an incredibly important activist who founded, in many ways, the founding father of Black consciousness. And he articulated the link between culture as a weapon of struggle. And the Black consciousness movement deliberately used poetry, film, performance to do exactly what these others have said, is to prepare people psychologically to be affirmed about their own culture and their arts and their practices. Okay, sorry, now I'm going to this. So also the ANC in South Africa in their exile formalized this idea of the cultural worker. So in the National Executive Committee of the ANC in 1981, in Oliver Tambo said, with the task, charged cultural workers of using the task, their craft to give voice not only to grievances, but also the profounded aspirations of the oppressed and the exploited. So here again, we can see this idea of dreaming, of aspiration. And he says the dominant class in any given society actively seeks to perpetuate itself and largely uses the medium of culture for this purpose. So for those of you who know Grumsky, he talks about this as well, about how hegemony and hierarchies work through cultural means, of one people dominating another by asserting the value in the way they live their lives, their languages, their arts, etc. So this brings me to my big questions, is how are the modes of cultural resistance, or the idea of the cultural worker, understood outside of official struggle? So we have this official notion of struggle, which links the culture to struggle in South Africa. But in the post-liberatory moments, what happens is arts and culture actually get denigrated and forgotten about. And so my question is, if arts and culture are a fundamental part of liberation struggles and embedded in political education and conscious raising, which they were a huge part of the union movement, a huge part of the liberation struggle in the exile, how do these in power see arts and culture post-liberation? And my answer is at the bottom there. Basically, the arts are undervalued, they are underfunded, they're not recognized, and most importantly, they're depoliticized. And that's really important. So we have got the most appalling Minister of Arts and Culture in this country, who is not the least bit interested in arts for imagination purposes, because of course it does. If anyone's got imagination, it doesn't really serve the elite or those in power. The picture that you've got in the background is one of my incredible, I think one of the most powerful, spontaneous moments of activism. So in the background, you have our ex-president, Jacob Zuma. He was delivering, in a very boring way, the results of local elections. And on that day, those 4 women in that picture realized it was the 10-year anniversary of Jacob Zuma's rape trial, where he was exonerated of rape. And they quickly got together and they wrote those signs that says, I am the 1 in 9, meaning 1 in 9 women in South Africa actually report their rape. 10 years later, Kanga, which references Zuma's excuse because he said she was wearing a wrap and he felt that she was seducing him, and remember Kwezi. And they stood in front of the lectern, in front of Zuma. He couldn't see what they were doing, in front of the whole national press, bravely standing. They said nothing. That's all they said. And so in this moment, they seize the moment and they remind the nation that that our president was accused of rape, and many believe he is a rapist. And of course, then what happens? Of course, security gets involved. They manhandle these women, and the display of hypermasculinity is then brought to the fore as they are dragged off the stage. So it's just a very powerful example of some young women in the moment, seizing the moment, and this story went all around the world and was screened live on national television. I just put this picture in. This is one of my, I do a lot of youth performance work, and they wanted to perform like 5 minutes in the street, and the police pitched up and said, no, you can't do that. It's just this wonderful, joyful performance by young people that was shut down from the police. Now, South Africa has a lot of problems. You think the police have better things to do, but no, they wanted to shut this down because it had disturbed a very quiet street for 5 minutes. Okay, so, right. Here's another little exercise so that I can stop speaking. In the chat, I want us to think a bit more nationally now. So we've got a lot of Americans here, so I'm interested to see what's going to happen. Could you write a national or international headline that you would love to wake up to tomorrow? So imagine something amazing happened, and tomorrow you woke up to this headline. I would like to invite everyone to write that headline in the chat, and I'd love you to dream big, have the audacity to imagine radical change. So can everyone in the chat, once you're ready, just write your headline so that we can see what is it that people would love to wake up to tomorrow? That's a headline that would be a big change. Okay, I'll stop talking a bit. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to read them as you keep going. All corporations now Commonwealth of the people. Yes. All world leaders agree to disarm all nuclear weapons. Congress passes a bill that affirms Roe versus Wade. Hallelujah. Education access for everyone. Teaching is now one of the top paying jobs. Love it. Racists everywhere are suffering dire consequences. This is mine, universal basic income grant for all. That would change a few things in our country. Republican senators concede to Democrats, pass bills that include codifying the right to abortion and protecting LGBTQ plus rights in history. Yes. World hunger has ended. Healthcare now available to all free of cost. The codifying of rights for women and LGBTQ plus people. Every school in the nation now mandated to include arts in the curriculum. Wonderful. Free education. Putin is removed from office. Ukraine is given compensation and aid in economic stability. No more borders. Global ban on unnecessary packaging and food. Oh, wonderful. Okay, well done. Okay, so we've all collectively imagined that makes me very excited. Another world. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to go into now is just a few examples of creative activism or creative ways that people have used the imagination or arts to bring about some kind of resistance and imagination. I think that's what's needed. And I love this quote from Steve Duncombe in New York. He says, all protest is theater. It's just some of it is really bad theater. And of course, politics is the same. All politics is theater. All politics is a spectacle and a performance. Some of it is just really bad. So just an example of some kind of playful symbol, of course, is the Trump blimp as a way of kind of a very simple symbol. Duncombe also speaks of all protests of having a scenographic kind of component of bodies and people in time and space, which I always find very useful. And this other picture is a picture from South Africa, and I think they do really good theatre in a way, in that they use Parliament as a spectacle. It's a political party that's quite populist, quite far left at some stages, could be quite far right at others. It's one of those, called the Economic Freedom Fighters. And what they do is, for when they are in Parliament, they wear these red overalls and red maid or servant outfits, because they see themselves as for the working people, working class and poor, but they also want to disrupt the kind of hegemony and civility of Parliament. And they do that in very particular ways through the way they dress, for example, and it's effective. And I mean, you know, Trump does this as well. His MAGA hat, I'm the ordinary man, you know, so that everyone who wears it belongs to that kind of idea of being part of the working man, which of course is and all politicians do it. I'm just going to go through it. Sorry, are there any questions? I feel like I'm racing along here. Am I doing okay, Dan?
You're doing, I think, great. It's very, very interesting stuff. But
Okay.
if people do have questions, this is a chance to jump in. In fact, feel free to jump in at any time by raising your hand. But any thoughts or comments or questions at this point? You can either speak up or put it in the chat.
Okay. So I'm just going to go through now some examples from Africa in particular about the ways in which people have used imaginative ways of consciousness raising or change. Okay, so the first is from Senegal, and this is a group called Yanama, which means fed up. And what they did was, it was a group of artists and investigative journalists who recognized how fed up mainly the youth was in terms of the political system and corruption. At the time in Senegal, there were rolling blackouts, so there was almost no electricity due to corruption. There was an election coming up, and they knew that the way to create change was to mobilize the youth vote. Now in Africa, the demographics of Africa, something like it's 70% youth. So the youth vote and the youth potential for political change is huge across the continent. And so what this group did was it used hip hop to inspire youth to become politically active and just to vote. Because they knew if young people voted, there was a chance of changing. At the time, the president was trying to change the constitution so he could have another term, which would make it even longer. And so they were trying to be very, very particular about mobilizing the youth vote through hip hop, and they were very successful. In fact, this leader never came in at the polls. And so what one of the founders says is, we were tired of criticizing without being physically involved. We wanted to do something that also showed that we were fed up, but also we wanted to let the Senegalese people understand that it was time to end this fatalism, this habit of keeping one's hands folded and doing nothing. It was time to be involved in the running of the country. And so it's a very inspirational example of young people and the use of popular performance forms as well to mobilize and get people seeing themselves as active political citizens. Inspired by Yanema is a group from Burkina Faso, which were quite integral in what became known as the 2014 revolution and the overthrowing of a dictator who again was trying to extend his term of office, and he would have been in office then for 27 years. And again, the unofficial leaders of this movement was a reggae singer and a hip hop artist as well. So again, they're mobilizing popular urban youth forms to mobilize. And they called themselves Citizens of the Broom. And it referred to the way of ordinary people tidying up the political scene, literally and figuratively. And so that's the brooms, or these traditional brooms that are used across Africa here, which becomes a key symbol when people come out en masse. And so if you search, you'll see lots of people of people with grass brooms. And the use of music concerts to mobilize was a key tactic, also inspired by the Yanema movements. And again, there was they did get this man out. Things are not great in Burkina Faso. I'm not saying things are wonderful democracy at the moment, but it was young people who caused the revolution and the change in government ultimately. So I'm just coming a bit locally now. These are from some of the movements that we've worked with at Tshisimani, and this is one of my favorite protests of all time. So this is a housing protest by urban housing activists who are trying to find ways that poor and working class people can have adequate housing close to resources. And so housing in the city. So I'm sure in America you have this notion of gentrification, where an area suddenly becomes quite hip and middle class, developers buy it up, and people who have been renting there for decades can no longer afford it. And so in Cape Town, the area that this was focused on is quite near the city, and it's historically with poor and working class people, many of whom come from slave heritage, who were just priced out, were being evicted. But when you're evicted, there's nowhere to go, or the city will just send you like something like 20 miles away from the city and away from the schools and everything and jobs. So they then decided, it's called Reclaim the City, this movement, they weren't getting any answers from their local councillor. So they pitched up outside his house at 5 a.m. He lives in a very nice leafy suburb in Cape Town. And they put up a table with a nice spotty tablecloth. They brought in cook sisters, which is a traditional Cape Malay breakfast suite. And they said, come Brett, we're having coffee. And so they served coffee and cook sisters, and they invited them around the table. And as you can see, there is their menu and questions about transitional housing. What do people need to earn for social housing? What are they going to do about the rising rent crisis? And so he was forced to come out. It's a wonderful way of saying, hi, yeah, we're human too. Come and have breakfast with us and let's chat. It's this idea of home, which is what their activism is about. And of course, it's wonderful press. So the papers are there, and this idea of, they call it the accountability breakfast, making Brett Heron accountable as a representative of the city around housing.
Did he come out for breakfast?
Yeah, there he is. That's him.
Oh, that's him. Okay.
yeah. He came, no, he's actually quite a nice guy. He came out, he had breakfast, they sat, he tried to answer their questions. There was lots of videos, yeah, so he did come out and have breakfast. Yeah. This is another favorite of mine. This is by a human rights group called Sonke Gender Justice. And this actually, so I don't know what the equivalent is, but in South Africa, we have something called the Department of Home Affairs. It is a very, very unhappy place. It is where you have to get documents such as passports, identity documents. If you're a refugee or asylum seeker, it's where you have to go to get all your papers. There are queues and queues and queues. The system never works. The computers break down. The officials are rude. They lose everything. You have to reapply. I'm sure there's some department like this anywhere in the world. And so in this particular, and in South Africa, asylum seekers and refugees are treated appallingly. And of course, as you know, you can't do anything if you don't have papers, and even if you have rightfully have papers. And so what they did was they turned Home Affairs in Cape Town into the Department of Happiness Affairs, in which they used bubbles and balloons, and they had a big they had a big welcome sign as a way of showing Home Affairs what a welcoming, caring department might look like. So often in activism, we go for the what's wrong and don't do this and don't do that. This is a way of saying, isn't this a joyful possibility? Isn't this a playful, joyful possibility for what a government department could look like? And they said, in the efforts to bring more attention and color to the dust and despair that characterize the conditions of Home Affairs, the civil society hosted the Department of Happiness Affairs. Its aim was to show the Department of Home Affairs what services to migrants could look like: a welcoming, empathetic, receptive space open to all asylum seekers and refugees who wish to apply for them. There were children, there was entertainment, all sorts of things as people waited in the queue. This is something quite different. So these are examples. One is from Kenya and the other one is from Uganda. And this is the use of livestock in public spaces. And in both the protests, they're not from the same organization, are highlighting the greed and corruption of government officials. So on the right-hand side in Uganda and Kampala, there was a group of unemployed youth who were sick and tired of not having any jobs, and government officials keep giving themselves more and more salary cuts. And the ruling party is yellow. So they dyed piglets yellow, and they let them out in the streets of Kampala. And some of the piglets were wearing hats. And everyone recognized it immediately and identified it with the ruling party. And then what happens is the government and the military get caught up in the spectacle of trying to gather the piglets and contain it. So it becomes this kind of absurd, satirical way of bringing attention. In Kenya, this was also an anti-corruption protest. Slogans were put on the pig skins, and then blood was poured in the street, which the pigs then ate as another very graphic symbol of corruption and greed. Now, obviously, all of these things are very contextual. You know, something like this might cause horror somewhere else, like in Europe, where animal rights people might go up in arms. So just to say, you know, you design what is necessary within the context and the culture in which you're working. This is another one which I love, which I think is very creative. South Africans will like this well. We also suffer from huge potholes. So in Zimbabwe, which is an incredibly repressive regime where you can't really protest peacefully or otherwise, some people, these huge potholes, so no one can drive anywhere. People started planting banana trees and other trees in the potholes, which was a playful way of not only bringing attention to the pothole, but bringing attention to the fact that the local government is not doing anything about filling in the potholes. And in this example, having done this, then the local government started doing its job in terms of service delivery. SWET is another fantastic organization. It's called the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, and they do incredible creative work. The one they do to kind of demystify sex work and actually, you know, find the human behind the the sex worker, so it's not just a sex worker, it's a human being, is they put up stalls in public spaces with pamphlets and have people behind them and say, ask a sex worker, what do you want to know? And it's like a very, also a very playful, humanizing campaign. In South Africa, SWET is very much about decriminalizing sex work. And so part of their decriminalization campaign is to find allies. And in this example, they worked with the Methodist Church in Cape Town to put a banner on the church, which says Jesus was the first to decriminalize sex work. And so again, it's a wonderful way to reframe the narrative around sex work, to reframe moralizing, and to get an unlikely ally on your side to think about some of the issues that they wanted to think about. Yeah, I think this is my last one. And then finally, this is an organization I'm going to be working with next week. I'm really excited. The Matara Social Justice Center in Nairobi is a network of social justice centers that exist in Matare, which is one of the very big sprawling informal settlements or slums in Nairobi. One of their biggest issues that they deal with is police brutality and state violence, or extrajudicial killings of young people in particular. So poor Black men are often just murdered for no reason. And so what they do is that they have a whole ecological greening campaign that not only is about ecological justice within the slum, but also they use it as a way to commemorate individual people who have been slain by the police. And so these tree planting ceremonies then become part of the campaign against extrajudicial killings and making those visible, so that those deaths are not just made invisible as the police would like them to be, but also as a means of greening Matare. So that's a kind of whirlwind example from Africa. And one of the reasons I wanted to focus on Africa is that there's a lot of examples in Europe and America. So there's lots and lots of different creative ways. And I think that we often miss out on this continent in the way that people under very, very under-resourced and very repressive conditions find ways to creatively imagine change and imagine a different future. So I'm just going to stop there for a moment. Are there any questions or comments or anything?
This kind of reminded me of so recently I heard in the news that it was like this art protest, like someone threw like food at a painting, but like apparently the main message about it was not to disrespect art, but it was mainly to like do something that would get the word around as to why they did it. You know, like it was a means to show an issue that they were trying to go for. So like I guess that would be considered like a sort of shock performance.
Yeah, that was quite controversial. So they threw tomato soup at one of Van Gogh's paintings in the National Gallery in London. It was a climate action protest. And then they glued themselves with super glue to the wall or to in the gallery. It's been quite a divisive protest. Some people are going, why Van Gogh? Why the National Gallery? You know, other people are saying it's brilliant. It gets people talking. You know, and so I think people in here might want to talk about that because it divided opinion about whose mind are you changing when you throw soup at a Van Gogh. Some people say, oh, it gets people to think, why do we care more about Van Gogh than we do about the environment, for example? So that was the counter. Yeah. So for example, there was another very interesting, so the Tate Gallery in London was funded by Shell and BP, big oil companies, both of whom have wreaked havoc, particularly, for example, in the Niger Delta. And so what climate activists wanted to do then was highlight, why are you taking money from these big oil companies? And so there was a performance installation where activists covered themselves in molasses to look like black oil and put themselves in the gallery. So I mean, that was also very powerful, which showed who was funding this gallery and what greenwashing is done by some of these big oil companies to go, oh, we're so civilized in culture, we're going to fund the this big, wonderful exhibition, and activists are saying, well, why are you taking this money? It's another site, which is an art exhibition, that some might argue might have been a little bit more direct and a bit more effective.
What struck me about a lot of your examples, Alex, was that they did embody what you call prefigurative politics. So, for example, the last one you did in Nairobi, where people planted gardens to commemorate young men who've been killed. You would think the normal, well, in our culture, the normal reaction to that would be to want to get revenge, and to whatever with cops. But instead they said, well, we want to create something positive as a way of remembering these kids. And then also the one from Zimbabwe where they planted banana trees in the potholes. Again, was, I think, a way of projecting something positive into in response to the injustice. It isn't to say one is better than the other. I'm just saying that struck me as and I wonder what other people are thinking. This is in some ways it's all about protest and trying to change the world, but I think Alex's focus on culture and performance is worth thinking about, and I wonder what you all are thinking. Let's see if there's anything in the. Well, here's Quinn Gilbert in the US. It says about the Van Gogh thing. I thought they might have chosen Van Gogh because it was a still life environmental piece. They destroyed it like the environment is being destroyed, in quotes. I don't know, though. Was this a successful protest? I'm not sure. What makes something a successful protest? That's a very interesting question. And Clevis says, it did get a lot of people talking about it, and I did hear many talk good about it, but I'm not sure if it was successful.
Yeah.
Again, yeah.
I think it's also understanding who's the audience and where is the site of power.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also quite important of what one does and how one does. So I was going to suggest a kind of exercise now as well in breakaway rooms if people want to do that, which is another kind of dreaming of a new world exercise, which hopefully is quite nice to do. So part of a successful toast is to get the media's attention. Yeah. So often that is the aim, to highlight something, to rewrite a narrative from a different perspective. So that's often what creative activism or creative protest should do, is to re-narrate from a different perspective. And sometimes the goal is for the media to pick it up as well. Depends which media. Okay. Okay, so I think this is what I thought we could do. So this is okay. So we're going to open some breakaway rooms, and then you're just going to I'm going to work on that, and you're all going to be arbitrarily put into different rooms. And this is what I thought we could do. And I thought you could choose a site or a system of something you all relate to that needs changing. And I think this just makes it a little bit more concrete, like the education system or the prison system or the health system or border control or housing. Okay, so something that's quite, so that's not too vague. And then I'm going to invite you to use, the reason Dan also asked me to do this was I've written a toolkit with other people on arts activism, but I'll put the link to that at the end. And in it, we talk about the importance of call and response, which is really a way of, in improvisation terms, making an offer, accepting the offer, and building on it. In many ways, somebody presents something and you respond and then you build. So this is kind of a call and response exercise. And so this is just a way of us starting. So one of you, say you chose schools. So person A starts, in our school, the school architecture was designed by the young people in the neighborhood. The next person then goes, yes, in our school, the school architecture was designed by people in the neighborhood, and every child is included regardless of their ability or barrier to learning. Then the next person goes, in our school, the school architecture, so you're building your idea of your ideal school. And this comes from a game I play with my children in the car. We call it build your ideal sandwich. So you have your you have your letters, and then the next person adds pickle, the next person adds cheese, and then you have to kind of remember all the layers. So this is a very similar exercise. You're just going to go around, you're going to imagine what a different schooling system, prison system, health system, border control system, whatever it is you decide might look like. And I'd like you to do 2 rounds. So if there are 5 people in the group, each person goes at least twice, and to start to get to think of that difference. And, like the examples of planting, a tree in a pothole, or having a stand saying, come speak to a sex worker, so that we're trying to find quite joyful, playful, positive ways that people can engage with an issue. See if out of that exercise, you can also think of some sort of action or activity in an interesting site or way that could ask people to think differently about a thing. Okay. So, Dan, I need to just figure out. I will put all this in the chat.
Yes. Any questions about what you'll be doing in your groups?
Hope that's clear for everyone. Sorry, I just have to figure out how to do this. It's making me individually assign things. Okay.
We're almost there, folks. You're getting assigned to your rooms.
Okay, I think that's everyone. Let's see.
Oh, how long do they have, Alex?
10 minutes. Let's just say
Okey
10
doke.
minutes. So Nikolai and Ella. Ella here. And can I send you somewhere?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I think not. Let them,
There's only 2 people in this one room because they haven't joined.
okay, well, maybe put them in 2 other rooms. I mean, if it helps you, sure, send me somewhere. But looks like everybody's in a room except for Ella. Ella, are you there? Can you hear us?
If I put in the chat, will it go to everyone?
I think so. You've got to, click on everyone in meeting. Well, there's Emma. Emma, you're not in a room?
I was in a room and then it kicked me to another room. So I came back here. I was in room 5 and then it kicked me to room 1. And I just noticed that room 1 had a lot more people than room 5 that I was in. So I came back here.
Okay, let me reallocate you. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I sent you to room 5.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Let's see. Still says room 1, but I can just go back to room 1 if that's fine.
I don't know. Just go to room 1. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, thank you.
I think there's 2 of her here.
If you are not in a room, could you speak up and let us know?
I think Ella's on 2 devices.
Okay, well, she's probably in a room. Oh, okay. We'll see what they come up with. They are not the most forthcoming group.
No.
But hopefully this will help generate some interaction.
Yeah.
Sorry, this breakout room stuff is all on you. Our usual text
That's all right.
support fell through. So, but
It's all right. It's all right. At least we don't have a very complicated.
right. I'm going to take advantage of this break to run to the restroom. I'll be
Okay. All right.
back
Cool.
in a minute. I'm back.
What's the weather there like, Dan?
The weather here, well, it's autumn now, you know, so it's chilly. Today happens to be sunny, so that's nice. And but it's, you know, it rains a lot in autumn here, cold and damp.
Have you moved house?
Yes, we're in a new house here
Amazing.
in Montauk. Yeah, this is our new um, our new office, and the
Wonderful.
great part of it is that one of the walls is mostly glass with a door, you know, like a big window door, and it looks out on the backyard with a lot of trees, and it's very pretty.
Lovely. And has everyone else moved out the Bank Street house?
Yeah, the Bank Street house is empty now. They haven't sold it yet. The other people we lived with there have gotten apartments in Jersey City, which is right across the Hudson River. It's accessible by a subway line. And we have a room in one of the apartments there. So when we need to go quote into the city, we can go there. And we have, you know, extra bedrooms out here, 2 of them, so people can come from. So we're still trying to sort of keep that social unit together. Although Lois and I don't particularly want to be in the city anymore. There's no real reason for it. Most of our work is done via Zoom and with the computer, and, you know, whatever. The appeal of the theater is less of a draw to me now. I don't know, for whatever reason, and the fancy restaurants I can live without. So
Yeah.
it's very nice to be near the ocean. And
Yes. Lovely.
yes. Thank you for asking.
Wondering, I did tell them that they can come back. Never know whether to close rooms, check how people are doing. These rooms are very uneven, and one group of 3, one group of 5, one group of 16.
Oh, well. And then, you know, I don't know in terms of when they get back, how much they'll talk, but we'll give them at least 10 minutes, right? Or 15
Yeah, it would be great to have some feedback.
would.
Give them another minute and then I'll close the rooms.
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm gonna
Okay.
start bringing people back. Good they haven't come back.
Yes. Here's Ella again. She's the last to leave and the first. There we go.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping there were some nice ideas generated and some nice talk. Yay, there's some nods. I divided the rooms appallingly, so I apologize. There was like a group of 5, a group of 6, and a group of 3. But, trying to do tech and manage everything is quite a multi-task. I'm really interested to hear if somebody would like to start, what topic you decided on, and how that went with the exercise and what are some of the things that you generated. I think everyone's back now.
I can
Thanks.
share.
Thanks. Great. Thanks, Addison.
My group, we had like 5 or 6 people. We talked about nonprofits and just in general, the whole system, nonprofit system. And we talked a couple of different things. One, about making sure that it's valued more and given more funding, because I mean, they are nonprofits, but they still need help to actually make the change that's their mission. They can't do it with no money. So just investing and prioritization. And then we also talked about making sure if nonprofits are going into different communities, making sure they're for the long term. So making sure that the nonprofit's going to go into this community and help, they're not just going to go in and go out and like give the resources and leave, making sure they invest and they take their time and really integrate within the community. And then the last thing we talked about was making sure that, I lost my train of thought, but just making sure that, what did we talk about? I had 3 points and now I'm forgetting the last one.
Healthcare.
Making sure. Yeah, we also talked about healthcare and how it's just really hard struggle because in countries that have free healthcare, the quality of the healthcare is lowered, which is definitely like a really bad scale that's going. And people who, if you live in America, right, and healthcare is privatized, so if you can't afford to get to that healthcare that you need, your life is more at risk or things like that. And so, yeah, we talked about nonprofits and then healthcare, and yeah.
Okay.
Did you get to talk about any kind of creative action or anything, or did you not get there?
No, we just more talked about the idea of what a perfect so-and-so would look like.
Okay, cool. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, healthcare. Huge. Yeah, so that was one group. What did the other group decide? There were 2 other groups. Could somebody just share what they focused on, what their dream was?
I'll go. My group, we had like 5 people. We were talking about sex education. We're talking about how ways to like improve on sex education would be like not teaching abstinence. That shouldn't be like the first way of educating the youth on sex, and also being more inclusive to members and people who are LGBTQIA plus, and also availability of like resources to inform yourself on the topic. Like books on it shouldn't be limited. Like it should be free for people to get their hands on.
Okay, wonderful. And you didn't get to think of any creative action that might think about what brilliant inclusive sex ed might look like?
No, we were just talking about like, like how we could improve it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Wonderful. And there was one group that was only 3 people because I was who was in the small group?
I was in a small group with Kate and Nikolai, I believe. And we kind of rotated between 3 different points. We also didn't really get to a whole lot of action steps, but we talked about certain ideas. So we started with education, talking about, like a point earlier, making the arts mandatory and making school lunches better, paying teachers more, and funding and funding underprivileged and underrepresented communities and their education systems. Sorry about that. And so next up, we talked about prisons and how just generally the conditions could be better in prisons, and healthcare and support for trans people in prisons, as well as arts communities and voting. And lastly, we talked about some environmental points, including making sure they're designated green spaces and making sure that departments, DOT specifically, are more considerate about what types of plants they use when putting greenery back after paving roads, because there tends to be quite a few invasive species that are not native to areas, and putting more of a focus on native plants and greenery.
Wow, that group's, yeah, you had quite a wide range of topics. It's wonderful that, yeah, 3 relative strangers could come up with all that stuff. So thank you so much. So yeah, it's obviously quite difficult with, you know, online and with a short space of time to kind of generate, but I'm hoping that some of what the examples I've given and some of the ideas have catalyzed ways to think about the link between creativity, hope, and activism and change. Yeah, so if there are any more questions or anything, that's all I've planned for today, and we're almost out of time anyway. So please feel free to leave any feedback in the chat or ask any questions or anything that's come up about some of those conversations.
And if others from the different groups have something they want to add, feel free. Well, it seems like the conversation generated a lot of ideas for a better world, and sort of, I think the springboard that we would like, that Alex and I think would like you to take with you now, is to figure out how to project that into the world in some creative way, to bring these ideas to your community, to your school, to your, if you are an activist already, to the people you're working with, and come up with creative ways of projecting a better world.
Just to say, in the chat, I've put a link to 2 toolkits. The first one is an arts activism toolkit that has been co-published, and the other one, if you work with young people, it's a toolkit that's on sort of creative arts workshops with youth, participatory arts with youth. So both of those are in the chat, and they're free to download. And so some of the work that I've been doing here is based on some of that stuff as well.
Right. The first one that Alex is very modestly saying she co-worked on is a great booklet. I think it's something that all activists should have, because it has lots of examples from all over the world, and also concrete things that people can build with to do creative arts activism. So please, click on those and look it over. And any last thoughts or comments before I tell you about what's coming up next at Let's Learn? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it, having you part of this conversation. The next class at Let's Learn comes up on Friday, November 4th. It's in the evening for those of you in the eastern part of the US. And it's at 7, it's in the morning, at 9 in the morning. It's at 7 p.m. In Bangladesh, which is where our teacher is from. And it's called Laptops in the Village. And Syed Rahman is the leader of a university there called Daffodil University, which has the slogan, each student, one laptop. And they give a laptop to everyone who becomes a student for free. And then during the pandemic, when they had to close down and most of their students were from small villages throughout Bangladesh, they were given the assignment to take their laptops home and use it to try to teach at home among the young people or older people who had no access to the internet. And so 5 of those students are going to be reporting on what happened when they brought their laptops home. So that should be very interesting. That's on November 5th. And then our final class of the semester relates back to political activism in Africa, where I'm having a conversation with Daniel Mamposa, who is the head of the Savannah Trust Theater in Zimbabwe. And he's going to talk about the history of political theater in Zimbabwe, including the work of the Savannah Trust, which goes into villages all over the country and creates plays with the people in the town. It's not actors performing the play. They create the play together, and then they use those plays as a way of generating community conversation. And that's on Tuesday, November 15th. And for those of you who just want to know more, you can always go to the Let's Learn page on the University of North Carolina. Well, it's actually on the Lloyd International Honors College website. All right. Any last thoughts or questions? No. Well, thank you, Alex. Let's give Alex a round of Zoom applause for sharing what she knows and does. Thank you. And
Thank you.
everyone, have a good rest of the day or evening, wherever you may be.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Alex.
Sure.